Today we're opening a file. We're looking at a collection of fragmented records, pieces that seem to detail the violent, systematic collapse of what we call the Greek heroic age. Now, this isn't a story of triumph. Think of it as an archival record of an ending.
The record starts right here, not with some grand call to adventure, but with a death sentence delivered to a baby. This single entry, it really sets the tone for everything that's about to follow. From the very beginning, this last generation of heroes was marked for tragedy. Their fates were sealed.
All right, let's examine the first section of the file. A new generation of heroes comes onto the scene, different from the likes of Hercules or Perseus. But their destinies, they feel like they're woven with much darker threads. This whole era kicks off not with hope, but like the prologue to a disaster.
Let's use this as our first case study, the hero Meleager. His story has all the key elements, right? A ticked-off goddess, a monstrous challenge, a hero's passion. But watch how it all unravels. The real conflict isn't with the monster, it's internal. He ends up killing his own family over a point of honor for a woman he's fallen for. And his doom? It's not delivered by an enemy on a battlefield, it's delivered by his own mother, carrying out the prophecy from his birth. It's just a perfect storm of pride, divine anger, and family conflict, all spiraling into self-destruction.
Okay, the next file covers a pretty familiar story, but the data we have suggests a different reading of it. The quest for the Golden Fleece is usually painted as this grand adventure, but the records present it as a bloody transaction, set in motion by a tyrant and only made possible by some serious divine meddling.
The central exhibit in this file is an anomaly, a real wild card, Medea. She isn't just a sidekick. The goddess Hera literally forces her to fall in love with Jason, basically turning her into a living tool to make sure he succeeds. She's this overwhelming external power, and her help is really a contamination that taints the entire mission.
Let's just look at this clinically, exactly how the record lays it out. Medea's help isn't heroic. It's a cold, procedural list of horrific acts. First, she betrays her own father and her entire country. Then, she uses dark magic to get past the dragon. And then, to make sure they can get away, she murders her own brother and dismembers his body, throwing the pieces into the sea just to slow down their father who's chasing them. This isn't some love-struck princess. This is calculated violence. This is a curse in motion.
So what was the end result of this whole bloody quest? Well, Jason gets the fleece and his kingdom for a little while. But then he betrays Medea, and that curse she represents comes due. She murders his new wife and their children, leaving him with absolutely nothing. And his own end? He dies years later, a lonely old man crushed by a rotting piece of his own glorious ship. The very symbol of his fame becomes the instrument of his pathetic, lonely death. So the self-destruction we've seen in individuals, now it scales up. The next section of the archive details the Trojan War, and this becomes the absolute epicenter of the heroic age's collapse. We're talking a decade of industrial-scale slaughter, all born from the pettiest squabble between gods you can imagine.
I mean, this comparison really just shows how absurd the whole conflict was. The official story, the one told to the soldiers, was about rescuing a queen. The actual reason? A golden apple thrown into a party by the goddess of discord. The entire war, all that death, it was basically just a payment for divine vanity.
And the human cost of this little divine game becomes clear almost right away. Before the Greek fleet can even set sail, the commander, Agamemnon, has to sacrifice his own daughter, Iphigenia, just to appease a goddess he annoyed. He murders his child for favorable winds. This one act shows you that the hero's ambitions were being paid for in blood long before they even saw the shores of Troy.
And once the war got going, the gods treated it like a game. They picked sides, as you can see here. Hera and Athena, still mad about the whole golden apple thing, they backed the Greeks. Aphrodite, who won the apple, she backed the Trojans. They would walk the battlefields, deflecting spears, whispering strategies, basically doing everything they could to make sure the conflict was as long and as bloody as possible, all for their own entertainment.
After 10 long years, the war finally ends. But this isn't a record of some heroic victory. It's a record of atrocities. The city is burned to the ground. The old king is murdered at his own altar. And to make sure Troy can never, ever rise again, the Greeks take the infant son of the great Trojan hero Hector and throw him from the city walls. This is the glory that ended the war.
But for the winners, the war wasn't over.
It was like an infection they carried home with them. The violence just followed them, showing up as curses, as madness, as murder. The homecoming wasn't a reward. It was just the next stage of the collapse.
Let's look at the commander himself, Agamemnon. He comes home a triumphant hero, the victor of the Great War, and he's immediately murdered. His wife, Clytemnestra, never forgave him for sacrificing their daughter 10 years before. She waited a decade, and the moment he got back, she killed him in his bath. The cycle of violence just keeps going, turning inward and consuming the family itself.
And then you've got Odysseus. We call his journey an epic adventure, but just look at this timeline. This isn't an adventure, it's a systematic annihilation. A curse from Poseidon kicks off 10 years of pure suffering. His crew gets eaten by monsters. He's held captive. He loses every ship, every single man. He finally gets home after 20 years, a broken man, only to find his house has been taken over by his enemies. His reward for winning the war was losing everything.
So this brings us to the final entry in the file. All this chaos, all this self-destruction, it just seems random, totally senseless. But the last of these records suggest it wasn't. They point to a bigger purpose, a deliberate design behind the whole collapse. A divine plan for withdrawal.
And here it is, the final revelation. The entire tragic era, from Meleager's curse to the ashes of Troy to the cursed homecomings, was actually the successful execution of a divine plan. The records indicate that Zeus himself engineered this collapse. He wanted one final, bloody war to purge the earth of heroes and demigods, and to permanently sever the connection between his world and ours.
So what was left behind? The records call it the Iron Age. Our age, a world with no gods walking the earth, no monsters in the forests. It's a harder world for sure, defined by work and struggle, but it's also a world where humanity was finally left alone, free from the random, destructive, terrible meddling of the gods, free to be masters of their own fate.
Which leaves us with one last question as we close this file. This violent record of an age being wiped clean, of heroes destroying themselves just to make way for a new world. Are we meant to read this as a history of what was? Or is it a warning about the price of greatness and the terrible, terrible cost of change?